Imagine the night arriving slowly, swallowing the world softly without threat. There are no city lights, no sound of engines, only the breath of the wind carrying the scent of wet earth and wild grass. In the distance, across a fading horizon, there is a glow that comes not from fire nor from the moon. It is gentle and cool, like the shimmer of something remembering itself after long being forgotten. No human worships it, for humanity has not yet learned the act of worship. They only look and they remain still. In that stillness, there is awe without a name, a kind of ancient reverence before language could shape feeling. Every gaze upon that light feels something moving inside the chest. Not fear, not joy, but a faint awareness that the world is speaking. At the edge of a valley where the first soil hardened after long rain, the light appears whenever night falls, piercing the fog. And the fog dances around it like spirits longing to be remembered. There is no record of its origin, no legend naming who first found it. For the light existed before hands could write, before mouths could tell stories. It is a silent witness of something older than time, something quietly waiting for humankind to become aware enough to see it not as a phenomenon, but as meaning. The people who lived in that age did not know the word beauty, yet they knew how to stop, breathe, and let their hearts drift with that unexplainable radiance. The light fell on damp stones, softly reflecting, scattering across grass like fine dust from the heavens. Beneath it, their shadows stretched, trembling as if greeting something greater than themselves. The night no longer felt black, but a calming blue-gray, like an old cloth wrapping the world to keep it whole. In that silence, there were no prayers, no pleas, only existence accepted without question. Perhaps it was there that the first concept of God was born, not from fear or need, but from wonder that defied explanation. Before humans built altars, before they lit incense, they had already looked upon that light and felt small, yet unthreatened. They did not know why it existed, only that a world without it would feel missing something invisible, yet essential. So they named it in their own way, not with words, but with feeling. The years were never recorded for that age, for there was yet no way for humans to measure time beyond the sun's movement and the seasons that came without consistent rhythm. Yet archaeologists and ancient thinkers estimate that it all happened more than 12,000 years ago, when ice still covered much of the earth and the world's shorelines were nothing like the ones we know today. In a region now swallowed by the northern seas, there was once said to be a vast and luminous plateau, where the sky hung so low that mist often brushed the heads of those standing on its slopes. There, the light was first inscribed in the memory of nature, among stones now sunken beneath the ocean's depths, silent yet still echoing the glow that once was. Modern researchers believe the region was part of the far northern latitudes, perhaps near what is now Greenland, or further east toward the frozen Arctic Ocean. Yet nothing is certain, for every time they dig, what they find are not only inexplicable artifacts, but also layers of earth that seem to refuse to tell their story. Some believe it was Hyperborea, the land of eternal light mentioned in Greek myth, where the sun never truly set, while others say it was merely an apostolate at the lost continent Atlantis before it sank in the wrath of the sea. But for those who truly study the light, Hyperborea is only a name, a symbol born from human tongues struggling to shape something unreachable. Whatever its origin, that place was not merely a point on a map, but a state of the world itself, where even the air felt alive and aware. There humans did not yet know iron, had not yet mastered fire as a tool, and built no permanent homes. They lived among stone and mist, beneath a gentle and unending sky. Gazing toward the strange glow that rose on the horizon each night, like a silent call from a future that had not yet come. The light might have emerged from within the earth, or perhaps from reflections of a primal aurora, yet even modern scientific explanations fail to satisfy the question of why it appeared only in certain places, and why its glow felt warm though the world then was frozen. Some called it the first flame, the source of light that did not burn yet granted life to all things near it. There are oral tales still whispered of wanderers who followed the light for months only to find themselves always returning to the same place, as if the earth had curved their steps so they might never truly reach its origin. No one knows if the story is true, or merely an echo of humanity's first collective dream and attempt to remember something lost within themselves. Those who lived near that light knew no names, for language had not yet taken shape as it is now. Only soft murmurs and gestures in the air, understood through habit and gaze. In the frozen silence, their bodies moved slowly, as if part of nature aware of its own being. Their skin was pale as moonstone, their long hair flowing and often reflecting the faint glow from the northern horizon. They knew no war, for there was no wealth to fight over, and they knew no permanent home, for the world itself was their shelter. Each night, they gathered on a wide plateau, sitting in circles beneath a starless sky, staring toward the light that drifted gently in the distance like the world's breath. That light seemed to have its own pulse, throbbing slowly like the heart of the earth, expanding and shrinking with calm rhythm. No voices came from them, yet the entire plain trembled softly whenever the glow reached its brightest, as though the ground itself prayed without words. Some modern researchers suggest that this phenomenon might have been caused by electromagnetic sacs, activity or radiation emitted by rare minerals beneath the surface, yet even the most advanced theories cannot explain why the light seemed to respond to the presence of humans nearby. Sometimes it appeared to draw closer when someone strayed too far from the group, then stopped once that person returned to the center of the circle, as if it were a being that guarded the balance between man and night. Some called it the guardian light, while others believed it to be the reflection of their collective spirit, something alive within both earth and human consciousness. At dawn, when fog began to descend, they would walk down the slopes to fetch water from clear streams. Carrying flat stones they used to draw strange shapes in the wet ground, perhaps records, perhaps prayers. Every line and circle they made seemed to follow the patterns of the light from the night before, as if their hands were guided by something older than thought. No one knows the meaning of those markings, yet thousands of years later, when some were found etched in stone by modern archaeologists, their forms were identical to spirals and circles known as ancient sun symbols in many cultures. How could humans who had not yet discovered writing create the same signs as civilizations born millennia later? That mystery became a small doorway to the possibility that human knowledge does not grow in a straight line, but moves in circles, repeating, sometimes forgetting its origin. The light stood as a silent witness to the first awakening of human awareness towards something greater than itself. Something they did not understand, yet could feel. As time passed, the northern sky began to change slowly. The light that had once been soft now stretched like a waving curtain, dancing between clouds and cold mist. Those who lived beneath it started to see signs they could not yet understand. Snow fell more often, and the sun seemed to delay its arrival each morning. Rivers that had once run clear began to freeze along their edges, forcing them to dig with stones to find water. In the long silence, they began to feel a change they could not explain, something rising both from within the earth and from the sky above. Distant rumbles were heard at night, like the steps of a giant creature moving beneath the ground. Some began to dream of a past they had never lived, warm forests and a sun that never set. When they told these dreams around the small fire, the elders only nodded, as if they knew that dreams were the earth's way of speaking to them. Amid this uncertainty, the light they had known as a friend grew brighter. It seemed to guide their migration, shifting gradually southward, as if showing them a new path. So they departed in silence, leaving behind the plateau where they were born, carrying stones etched with sacred spirals. There were no maps, no definite destination, only a faint belief that wherever the light stopped, life would be waiting. Their journey lasted for years, crossing frozen plains and dark valleys. Beneath a sky that changed color like the breath of a weary god. They ate roots and fish found beneath the ice, learned to make fire by striking stones together, and began to recognize new constellations emerging in the night. Slowly, the light they followed changed form. It no longer floated in the air, but seemed to sink into the ground within a wide valley. There they built their first settlement, simple yet full of reverence. In the center of the valley, they erected a great circle of stones, with one tall stone at the heart pointing precisely toward where the light was last seen. Night after night, they gathered there, gazing at the stone, and upon it appeared a faint shadow, as if a face looking back at them. No one knew when the light truly vanished. Perhaps it sank into the earth, or perhaps it waited on the other side of the sky. All that remained was the echo of faith that something once reached out to them, then left, leaving a trace that would never fade from the memory of the world. As the valley became inhabited, life slowly grew like the first grass after winter. Amid the mist covering the mountains and the sound of water flowing through cracks in the stones, people began to sense a new rhythm within their lives. They named the place with a word that meant home of the light, though no one knew where the word came from. Children were born and grew up without ever seeing the original light that guided their ancestors, yet its story was told every night. The elders described it as a ray that sang without sound, trembling in the air like the warm breath of something alive. From those stories, the first form of belief was born, not a religion in the sense that humans would later understand, but a simple reverence toward something that could not be explained. They placed small stones around the great circle, forming spiral patterns similar to the carvings on the sacred stones of their forebears. Each spiral was carved by bare hands, slowly, as if each stroke were a prayer. On certain nights, when the wind blew from a particular direction, they claimed to hear a soft humming rising from the ground beneath the circle. No one dared to speak loudly then, believing the earth was listening. The light they once followed had now become a symbol, something unseen yet alive in every breath and step they took. They began to see it in the reflection of water, in the gleam of animal eyes, in the sparks when stones struck each other. They began to write upon the rock walls not letters, but marks that depicted movement, direction, and emotion. Slowly, those symbols became the first language, not for speaking, but for remembering. They did not write to explain, but to prevent something from being lost. Each mark was an extension of the light that had once come to them, and they believed that as long as those signs remained, the world would stay in balance. Time passed, generations changed, and the valley became the heart of something larger. People from distant lands came, bringing their own stories, yet all bowed before the stone circle in the middle of the valley. They did not know why they were drawn there, it's only that something there seemed to be waiting, something calm, unassuming, yet powerful. The valley became like the heart of the world, beating slowly, holding the memory of an age when light still spoke and humanity had not yet learned the meaning of prayer. Days in the valley moved with a silence that never felt empty. Morning arrived slowly, as if the sun were reluctant to pierce the fog that hung between the trees. Smoke from the hearth drifted gently through the air, carrying the scent of wet stone and slow-burning dry leaves. Amid that stillness, the sound of water was the only thing truly alive. Dripping from cracks in the rock into clay vessels carefully placed around the stone circle. The people called that water the breath of light, and they drank it each morning before speaking to one another. No one knew when the custom began, only that by swallowing a drop of water from the heart of the earth, one could hear the world more clearly. Children ran around the stone circle carrying small wooden pieces they carved themselves. The patterns were never the same, yet always circular, as if following something buried deep in their memory since birth. The elders watched them in silence, smiling faintly as though recognizing something they could not explain. Each evening before the sun set, the elders slowly walked around the stone circle, counting their steps carefully. They believed each step was an echo of the first steps of humankind, steps that followed the first light. When night came, there were no lamps, only small fires flickering in a few places, just enough to mark human presence without disturbing the darkness. In that darkness, they listened to the sounds of the world, not sounds from outside, but those rising from within their own chests. Sometimes someone would stand, look up at the sky, and whisper something that sounded like a name, perhaps a god's name, or perhaps only a sound that appeared without purpose. There were no grand ceremonies, no loud songs. Only the awareness that night was the time for the world to speak, and the duty of humankind was simply to listen. They believed that the first light had never left, only hidden itself within every still object, waiting to be called back by a heart calm enough to recognize it. Within such long silence, stillness was no longer emptiness, but a space where the world remembered itself. Every day in that valley unfolded like that, unhurried, without clear purpose, yet filled with meaning that never needed explanation. On certain days, when the fog descended thicker than usual, the inhabitants of the valley would gather at the mouth of a cave facing north. There was no clear sign of when they decided to do so. It was as if nature itself gave the signal in its own quiet way. Sometimes the fog came with a faint hum from within the earth, a low, trembling vibration that made the air around them feel denser. When that happened, they would bring small stones from their homestones taken from riverbeds or the slopes of hills and place them inside the cave, precisely along the line of shadow cast by the morning light. The cave was not large, but its walls glimmered like dark glass, as though it contained a light that did not come from outside. Children sat at the edge of the entrance, watching wide-eyed as the elders arranged the stones into a spiral pattern that always began from a single central point. No one spoke. Only the sound of stone meeting stone and the slow rhythm of breath filled the air. They believed that by arranging the stones according to the shadow, they were rewriting the earth's memory, recalling the time when the world was still young and not yet divided between day and night. There was a long, deep silence each time the pattern was completed, as if the entire valley held its breath. Then the morning light would begin to move, tracing along the cave wall, and that was when everyone lowered their heads. Some closed their eyes. Others stared into the fading darkness, hoping to see something that never truly appeared. There were no prayers, no pleas only, an ancient habit that survived without reason. Some said that when the light touched the center of the spiral, their shadows disappeared for a moment, as if the world had forgotten them. Yet no one was afraid, for to be forgotten by the world did not mean to vanish. It meant returning to the first light they had once worshipped. Afterward, they would leave slowly, never looking back. The small stones remained, some crumbling, others fused into the cave floor, becoming part of something older than human memory. And whenever someone passed the cave at night, they could feel a soft warmth flowing from within, like the gentle breath of the living earth itself. Beyond the valley, past the towering wall of pine forest, stretched a high plain seldom touched by human feet. The wind there was drier, carrying the scent of stone and moss that seemed to grow in the air itself. From that direction, small groups sometimes appeared, moving slowly toward the valley, bringing with them tools made of a metal the cave dwellers had never seen before. The metal shone dimly, not like gold or silver, but like frozen moonlight. Those who came seldom spoke, and when they did, their voices echoed as if from a great distance. The valley people called them the keepers of the second light, for they did not worship the sun, but something they called the first reflection. No one knew what that meant, yet they carried a round object always kept beneath a black cloth. Sometimes at night, one of them would slowly uncover it, revealing a surface smooth as still water. And when watched closely, a soft blue light would pulse from within as though breathing. The valley children would fall silent at the sight, and even the animals stopped moving. No one knew where they had found such a thing, but the elders believed it was a remnant from when the earth was not yet solid, when everything was still light, searching for form. They stayed briefly near the river that flowed into the cave. During their stay, they built a circle of stones smaller than the ones made by the valley dwellers, but in patterns never repeated twice. Each night they sat around it, watching a small fire that burned blue instead of the usual red and yellow. Some of the valley people joined them, trying to understand the meaning of their ritual. Yet the keepers of the second light offered no explanation. They only pointed toward the sky and then to the ground, as if saying the two still spoke to each other. Only humanity had forgotten how to listen. One day, when the fog thickened and the air grew cold, they vanished without a trace. No footprints, no ashes only. The stone circle remained, faintly glowing when touched by the morning sun. Afterward, the cave dwellers began to imitate their designs, carving the same shapes onto the cave walls, though never quite succeeding. From that time on, the light inside the cave changed hue, from pale gold to soft blue, as if the visitors had left behind part of their secret to be remembered or, perhaps, to be followed when the world once again forgot where it began. After the keepers of the second light vanished, life in the valley began to change, not in a way that could be noticed right away, but like mist quietly entering the breath. Each night, the valley dwellers started to dream of a place they did not know, as if another world had slipped into their minds unnoticed. In these dreams, they walked among towers of crystal reflecting blue light, and atop each tower was the same symbol as the stone circle left behind by the keepers. When they awoke, some of them drew the shapes they had seen on the ground, yet curiously. The drawings always changed slightly by the next morning, as if refusing to settle into a single meaning. Children began tracing the same symbols in the river sand, then erasing them without knowing why. The elders noticed that whenever the shapes appeared, the birds around the cave flew away, and the river's surface rippled, though no wind was present. No one felt fear, only a strange calm, too perfect to feel natural. The nights in the valley grew longer than before. The moon seemed to move slower across the sky, reluctant to leave. Inside the cave, the blue light grew slightly brighter each night. Some claimed to hear faint sounds within it, not words, but a long tone like that of a flute carved from stone. Hunters who slept near the cave reported dreaming of seeing themselves from afar, standing in the same place but in another time. An old woman named Lirima began to speak in her sleep, uttering words unknown to anyone. When morning came, she said that in her dream she saw humans made of light walking over a frozen sea, carrying the same blue sphere once held by the keepers. They looked at her and spoke without sound, saying that the world would turn back to its beginning, and that the light was not merely a reminder, but a bridge between what once was and what had yet to be born. The valley dwellers began gathering each night before the cave. No one led, no prayers were spoken, only a silence, dense as fog. Sometimes someone would throw a small stone toward the circle. The stone would vanish in an instant, leaving behind the smell of burned metal. After that, they stopped touching the stones. They only sat and watched, as if waiting for something they could not understand. Some children stopped aging at the usual pace, as if time had caught on their bodies. A deer was found dead by the riverbank, eyes wide open, reflecting the same distant blue light. There were no wounds on its body, only a faint mark on its chest resembling the same circle. From that night onward, no one slept peacefully again, not from fear. but from the quiet conviction that if they closed their eyes too long, they might not wake up in the same world. A few days after the deer incident, the light inside the cave began to seep through the ground. At first, it appeared only as a thin, glowing crack visible at night. But over time, it spread into a network of luminous lines stretching across the valley floor. From the hilltops, one could see the pattern forming a vast, rotating circle, pulsing slowly, as if the valley itself were breathing. Each time the light pulsed, the ground quivered gently, and a faint humming sound, like a distant chant, rose from the depths of the earth. The children called it the breath of the world, while the elders exchanged silent looks, knowing deep down that whatever was happening was not merely a natural wonder. Along the riverbank, small stones began turning pale blue, their surfaces smoothing like glass. When someone tried to pick one up, it felt warm to the touch, as if something alive slept within it. Some began collecting the stones, believing they brought clearer dreams, even claiming to glimpse the future reflected in their glow. But on the third night after too many had been gathered, the river suddenly froze despite the mild air. The ice reflected the same blue light from the cave, casting layered shadows that danced on the frozen surface. Soon after, a deep, drawn-out sound echoed across the valley. Many covered their ears, but the sound wasn't carried by the air, came from within their own chests. The next day, the trees surrounding the valley began losing their green. Their leaves turned silvery, and their trunks emitted a faint shimmer whenever the wind passed through. A black bird perched on one of the branches suddenly went still, then dissolved into ash-like light that vanished into the air. After that, the animals began to leave. Only the humans remained, drawn by something deeper than fear. Some began dreaming in a language they couldn't understand, and when they tried to speak it upon waking, the air around them trembled slightly, producing echoes that lingered longer than their voices. People started to believe that their valley was no longer entirely within the same world it once was. When the light began forming the third circle in the valley, something within the rhythm of time shifted. Days felt longer, yet the sun still rose and set as usual. People started losing their sense of what morning and night were. They slept when their bodies grew heavy, not when the sky turned dark. Within days, life in the valley seemed to slide out of the familiar order of hours. A child who fell asleep in the afternoon could wake to find stars high above, while his parents swore only seconds had passed since he closed his eyes. Some said time had cracked like glass, and through its fissures, something older than the world was quietly seeping in. Inside the cave, the first and second circles of light remained still, but the third spun slowly, emitting faint flashes whenever the surrounding stones trembled. Those brave enough to approach said the sound resembled a deep breath drawn by the earth itself. An old woman named Era tried to count the pulses of light and discovered that each vibration came at equal intervals, as though the valley now possessed its own heart. Era began keeping notes on her wall, charting the patterns, and every time she wrote, her hand trembled as if eager to complete an unfinished sentence. One night, she found that her writing had changed. Her handwriting now contained symbols she did not recognize, spiraling in the same shape as the circles within the cave. The next morning, some villagers noticed their shadows moving a fraction slower than their bodies. When they stepped to the right, their shadows followed a heartbeat later. Soon after, the shadows began showing things their owners did not do. A man saw his shadow kneel while he stood still. A little girl saw hers pointing toward the cave, then turning as if to beckon her forward. After that, no one stood long in open light. They lit small fires in their homes, not for warmth, but to keep their shadows pinned to the floor, so they would not wander away. In the nights that followed, the cave's light softened, as if soothing them not to fear. Yet within that gentleness lay a quiet that pressed on the chest, like someone trying to remember something long forgotten. In the distance, the wind carried faint whispers not from the sky, but from within the earth itself, though a voice were speaking from beneath the valley. Those who listened calmly said the words sounded like a name, one never taught to anyone, yet strangely familiar deep in the soul, like a call from a time before the world knew time. On the seventh day since the third circle appeared, the sky above the valley looked like cloth stretched too tightly. The sunlight that once fell gently now felt heavier, as though pressing upon the earth with an invisible weight. The air changed not cold nor warm, but thick, each breath sounding slower. Birds that once soared above the trees now perched silently, their wings trembling without motion. Leaves ceased to sway as if holding their breath, waiting for something. That was when the villagers noticed that their shadows, which once lagged behind, had stopped entirely. They stood under the light, and no dark shape followed them. For some, it felt like liberation, as though the light had finally accepted them without division. But for others, the vanishing of their shadows felt like losing something deeply personal, like the quiet voice of their own hearts had gone silent. When one looked into the river, they found their reflection was gone. The water mirrored the sky, the trees, the stones, but not the people. It was as if the river refused to remember anyone. A young man named Rylene bent close to the surface, hoping to find himself, but saw only small ripples forming the shape of another face watching from below. He stepped back, breath trembling, and from that moment no one dared to touch the water without closing their eyes. Water became something else, no longer for drinking or washing, but a mirror to another realm that no longer wished to share its image with humankind. Amid these changes, the valley's plants began to grow strangely. The grass thickened, and flowers bloomed at night, their petals glowing faintly like the cave's stones. A fearless child tried to pluck one, and when the petals were touched, the light moved into the child's skin, glowing briefly before fading, leaving a faint spiral mark on the back of the hand. The villagers called it the remembering light. Soon, similar marks appeared on others without reason, as if from dreams of touching something forbidden. In silence, the valley began to speak its own language. Each night, the air filled with a low hum coming from the great stones in the west. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated gently in the chest, a resonance that seemed to crawl into bone. Some began to talk in their sleep, speaking soft, unfamiliar syllables, sounding like prayers, yet meant for no one. Children drew small circles in the dirt without knowing why, tracing the same patterns as those glowing inside the cave. No one taught them. No one remembered when they began. On the final night of that week, the stars appeared closer than before, like small eyes peeking through folds in the sky. At the edge of the valley, Era sat beneath them, her old eyes lifted upward, and in a quiet voice she said she felt. The world was trying to remember something through mankind, like a dreamer recalling their own face after 1,000 forgotten years. Her words silenced everyone. The valley felt like a space between breaths, a moment when the world held itself still before speaking. Yet no one knew what the earth might say if it ever chose to answer. The night after Era spoke, the valley was no longer silent. From beneath the earth came a soft sound, a long sigh like the breath of a creature just waking from an ancient sleep. It came not from one direction, but from all beneath their feet. The ground trembled gently, barely felt, yet enough to make grains of sand on the floors of their homes shift into faint, wandering lines. Each line seemed to imitate something, like a memory of a map not yet complete. Villagers stared carefully, and some began to see recurring patterns across homes and fields. They formed vast spirals converging toward the western edge of the valley, where the sound was strongest. No one knew how those marks appeared all at once, and no one dared to erase them. They feared that perhaps the lines were not mere motions of sand, but the earth's first attempt at learning to write. When morning came, the sun appeared to rise from the wrong direction. At first, they thought it was a trick of the eyes, but soon the mountains shadowed to the east fell where the sun should have been. The light shone in reverse, as though time itself had decided to move backward without warning. The river, which once flowed south, began slowly turning north, back toward the mountains as if returning home. Fish swam against their habits, and the stones at the riverbed chimed softly as they rolled. No one panicked. Somehow, it was too beautiful to fear. There was a strange serenity in the reversal, as though the world was turning itself over to reveal another face long hidden. A stone carver named Elon began recording what he saw on the cave walls. He didn't write in words, only circles that changed shape each night. The drawing seemed alive, shifting slightly whenever he returned to look. On the third night, the circles began to emit a faint blue-green glow, like the trapped breath of the deep sea. People came to see, and some claimed to hear a whisper behind their thoughts, not through the ears, but within the mind. They said the whisper spoke not in language, but in feeling. The feeling was a memory that wasn't theirs, of a time before humans knew day and night, when there was only one endless light that never died. The days that followed became difficult to separate. Day and night no longer alternated properly. Sometimes sunlight lingered too long, freezing the forest's shadow on the ground. Then suddenly the sky turned entirely dark, not the familiar night, but a darkness that felt like being inside the body of the earth. The voice beneath the soil grew clearer, forming long, undulating tones, like music played by something vast and distant. Plants in the valley began to grow in rhythm with it, their stems bending as if dancing to a song only they could hear. Some began to dream strange dreams. In those dreams, they walked beneath the ground through tunnels lit by the gentle glow of breathing stones. They saw great hands of light-shaping figures from clay faces of humans, unfinished and silent. In the dreams, there was no fear, only an aching longing they could not explain. When they awoke, their hands were dusty, as if they had truly touched the soil. Then they knew that whatever was happening was not merely a change in nature, but something deeper, as though the world was quietly replaying its own memory so that humanity might listen without burning. The ground began to crack beneath their feet on the 7th day since the first sound was heard. There was no quake, no violent tremor, only a soft creaking like old wood stretching beneath the heat of the sun. The fracture wasn't frightening. It opened slowly, forming a long curve at the western side of the valley, where the spiral of sand had converged. From the gap came a cold breath, smelling of metal and dried flowers, the scent of a place sealed away for ages. The villagers gathered around in silence. None dared step too close. Who had remained wordless since her vision, now walked forward without hesitation. She knelt and touched the edge of the crack with her fingertips, then whispered that something down there had slept far too long. The air held still at her words, as if the world itself paused to listen. That night, the sky grew strange. The stars, usually scattered, clustered together in one direction, forming a thin wound across the heavens. From that celestial scar descended a beam of pale silver-blue light, falling directly onto the fracture. The light wasn't blinding. It was soothing, like cool water gliding over the skin. When it touched the earth, it seeped downward, and the entire valley pulsed gently in rhythm with the people's own heartbeats. Some closed their eyes and began to see not dreams, not hallucinations, but visions of another realm. One that existed within the earth rather than above it. They saw a city carved from luminous stone, twisting corridors guarded by giant statues of human-bird hybrids, and rivers of silent light flowing endlessly. It felt so real that several wept without knowing why. The next day, the crack had widened. From within came a faint metallic chiming, not from machines or tools, but from something alive. A small child named Lynn descended first before anyone could stop him. He stepped lightly, and as his feet touched the bottom, the surrounding light flared like a newly lit candle. He looked downward and laughed as if he had seen something beautiful. Moments later, his voice vanished, and the glow dimmed. When they called out to him, only the echo of his laughter returned, followed by a cold breath of air rising from below. After that, no one dared to go down again. But the next night, the crack itself changed. It appeared to close slowly, not with soil, but with a transparent layer of crystal growing from its edges. The crystal reflected the starlight, creating a calm vision like a small lake made of light. When they peered into it, they no longer saw dirt or stone, but their own faces slightly altered. Some appeared older, others younger, and some were not their faces at all. A few claimed they saw a sleeping visage staring back, eyes open as if waiting to be recognized. The valley now lived in a silence heavy with meaning. They no longer spoke much. Each night, they sat around the crystal lake that had once been a crack, listening to the faint voice of the earth below, which had become a low hymn, a distant choir with no language, only harmony. They didn't know whether the sound was a call or a warning, but they all felt that something beneath was slowly awakening. And they were only the audience meant to watch, and remained still. A few days after the lake of light had become completely clear, its surface began to tremble softly, like the rhythm of a slow breath. Each time the wind passed, the light within shifted in color from silver to gold, then to a bluish green like an ocean hidden beneath the earth. People soon realized that the lake no longer merely reflected the world above it. It began to show something else, something that resembled memory but belonged to no one among them. The images appeared gradually, like silhouettes forming behind fog. At first, they were vague shapes, then slowly sharpened into clarity. They saw vast plains without trees, a low sky, and tall figures with copper-colored skin walking upon luminous soil. These figures did not have human faces, only gentle light where eyes should have been. They carried long staffs, and each of their steps left glowing footprints that remained lit even after they were gone. Children sat by the lake, wide-eyed in wonder, while the elders remained silent, uncertain whether they were witnessing the past or the future folding back on itself. Some whispered softly that perhaps these were the first wanderers, being spoken of in forgotten tales no longer told aloud. Some said they were servants of the first light, guardians between sky and earth before mankind learned to speak. Yet none knew for certain, and the longer they stared, the harder it became to look away. For the lake seemed to recognize whoever gazed upon it, showing a vision different for each soul. A woman named Cyril saw something else entirely. She saw a dark red sea swelling beneath a violet sun, and in its center stood a tower of black stone that gleamed like glass. At its peak spun a wheel of light, slow and breathing, from which thousands of threads of radiance stretched upward to touch the sky. Each pulse of the threads made the earth quiver softly. The sight pressed against her chest with strange familiarity, as if she was remembering something long buried. When she leaned closer, the water rippled and reflected her own face, but her eyes glowed gold, and her lips moved in silent prayer, uttering words from an unknown tongue. Every night, the visions changed, as though the lake was not just showing another world, but attempting to communicate through layered, repeating imagery. Sometimes it showed forests growing upside down, their roots suspended in the air like strands of light. Sometimes it revealed cities beneath the sea, inhabited by shadows walking in silence. At times, it displayed faces from the past, long dead, smiling faintly through the water. No one knew whether any of it was real or merely reflections of their own minds, mirrored by the ancient light. Yet one thing was certain: the lake was no longer still. It now breathed with them, reflecting secrets that even the earth hesitated to remember. Gradually, the people began to treat the lake not as a sacred place, but as a living being. They lit fires around it, not to pray, but to maintain the balance between the warmth of the earth and the cold of the light. In silence, they felt that something beneath was still growing, like a seed waiting for its own season to bloom. The sound from below, once like a song, now resembled a sigh deep and heavy. At times, like the breath of a colossal creature long asleep. They did not know whether they were guarding something or being guarded by it. But every night in the valley ended with the same quiet certainty. They were witnessing something that must never be forgotten. The following night arrived with a silence longer than usual. The wind stopped blowing through the valley, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The light from the lake slowly softened into mist, no longer reflecting but seeping into the air, making the sky above it throb gently like a heart awakening. There was no sound except for the faint rustle of the water surface, trembling for no reason. The people who gathered by the shore did not speak that night. They only sat, watching the lake shine more brightly from within, as though something was slowly rising. Then, without warning, the water reflected a sight none had ever seen. It was not a known past, nor a foreseeable future. It was a sky not yet a sky, and an earth not yet earth. In that space, colors had no names, and the air had no direction. In the midst of that emptiness appeared the first point of light, so small it was barely visible, yet slowly growing like dew, expanding on a leaf's edge. It did not shine outward, but inward, forming space, shape, and time within itself. From that point emerged waves that moved like breath, creating lines that intersected, weaving an enormous net of light. The people in the valley watched without blinking, for every knot in that net seemed alive, pulsing like newborn stars. Then something like a sound, though not sound as they knew it, rose from within the lake. It was like a gentle echo resonating inside their chests, speaking without words, reminding them of something they once knew before they became human. One of the children began to cry softly, not from fear, but from recognition, as though their soul remembered that vision, as though they were looking at the origin of themselves. The elder beside them closed his eyes and prayed silently, though he did not know to whom. The lake continued to reveal the scene, showing how the web of light turned into a vast spiral, spinning and thickening on one side, until it slowly formed something like the surface of land. Then came the first crack, not destruction, but birth. From it flowed a golden current that split the darkness, and on the edge of that spiral appeared a faint shape resembling a human, though not yet whole. The figure did not move, only stood between light and shadow, as if waiting. Some lowered their heads, unable to look any longer, for the vision felt too immense to comprehend. They felt as if they were peering into something that was never meant to be seen. Yet the lake did not stop. It continued to reveal layer upon layer, showing a young world, brilliant, yet silent. No trees, no animals, only traces of light across warm earth, like the patient touch of hands forming existence. In the distance stood mountains still growing, and seas glowing with a copper hue. The sky above was not blue, but silver, filled with slow-moving orbs of light, as if waiting for a signal to fall. Then, one of the watchers, an old man with ash-white hair, whispered almost inaudibly. He said what they saw was not the memory of the world, but the memory of the light itself. He said perhaps the light was trying to remember itself, the way humans remember their lost childhood. His words echoed within them, bringing both calm and unease. For if light could remember, it could also forget. And if what they witnessed was something being remembered, then perhaps all that existed now was only a repetition of what had already been. That night, the valley felt deeper than ever, as though the earth was gently opening its secret. One breath at a time, while in the sky, the stars began to tremble faintly. as if listening to the story being told by the ancient light beneath them. On the fourth night, the air around the lake felt as though something was learning to breathe again. The silence was not entirely still, for beneath it lay a faint rhythm, like the subtle heartbeat of the earth. The lake still glowed, though now its light moved gently, forming living ripples across the surface. The people were no longer afraid. They simply sat where they were, bodies still, eyes wide open, as if enchanted by the stillness itself. In the lake's reflection, the figure that had stood between light and shadow the night before began to move. It walked, though not in any direction that could be understood. Its steps left no trace, and with each shift, the light around it changed color from white to silver, from silver to gold, then back to white again. The figure looked human, but not entirely. Its face was vague, as if made of mist that reflected every color, yet held none. Its body seemed solid, yet every movement released tiny sparks into the air, like stardust drifting softly. Whenever it paused, the ripples on the lake paused too, and whenever it moved, the earth around the lake seemed to move with it. The watchers began to notice something strange. They were not only seeing the figure in the water, but also within themselves. Some felt their bodies remembering the same gestures, as though they had once been part of that light and had long forgotten. The child who had cried the night before now smiled. He reached toward the water, and the water responded softly, swirling around his fingers. He laughed without sound, and in the reflection, his smile appeared as two small lights meeting. The adults behind him exhaled deeply, unsure whether they were witnessing a miracle or something far older than miracles themselves. The figure in the lake then bowed slightly, as if acknowledging their presence. In its slow motion, there was a sense of recognition, not through sight, but through knowing. It raised its hand, and at that moment, the entire lake pulsed once, forming a vast ring of light that expanded outward to the shore. Everyone there felt the vibration in their chest, like their heartbeat had suddenly merged with the earth. Then something happened that made them all hold their breath. From the lake's depths, another light emerged, duller, deeper, not shining, but glowing from within darkness. It neither rose nor sank, but hovered in the center, surrounded by fine lines like letters unknown, writing themselves in the air. The letters did not form words, yet they all understood them, not with thought, but with memory that had no beginning. At that moment, they realized what was happening was not a vision, but communication. The earth was speaking, or perhaps something older than the earth itself. Among them, a young woman whispered softly, her voice barely audible. She said what they saw was the light teaching the world to know itself. Her words were gentle but echoed, like a sound rippling through an endless space. No one contradicted her. No one replied. In their hearts, they all felt the same truth. The night stretched long, but not painfully. Time moved slowly, as if bowing before a sight too sacred to rush. The sky remained still. The stars gathered to a faint spiral above the lake, and beneath it, the figure of light gazed at them one last time before slowly dissolving back into the water, leaving only a soft vibration that lingered long after all light had faded. As the figure of light slowly vanished into the surface of the lake, all that remained was a faint echo in the air, not a sound, bit of vibration that lived between the chest and the mind. Those still sitting by the lakeshore began to feel something strange. The surface of the water had changed. It no longer looked like water, but like a breathing mirror. Its ripples were calm, yet beneath that calmness, faint shapes began to appear, one by one, like faces emerging from behind a veil of mist. At first, they were only vague outlines, reflections of someone who wasn't there. But gradually, they sharpened human faces, though not from the present time. One face seemed to belong to someone from thousands of years ago, with eyes calm and deep as river stones. Another appeared young, perhaps from an age yet to come, with an expression no one alive could recognize. Each face lingered briefly, then faded, replaced by another, as though the lake was cycling through the memories of the world. No one dared to speak. They only stared, knowing that even a single word might shatter the reflection. Then came the face that made everyone freeze, a very old woman, with hair like a blend of ash and light, gazing from within the water. Her eyes were not frightening, yet they contained something vast, so vast that anyone who met her gaze felt as though time itself was watching them. She opened her mouth, and though no sound emerged, the movement of her lips created something in the air. The words appeared not as sound, but as light, floating above the lake. The letters glowed softly, and somehow everyone understood. All that comes from the water will one day remember its origin. After that, the woman's face dissolved into a calming shimmer, and the entire lake reflected the sky with an unprecedented clarity. The stars above seemed to fall slowly toward the surface, but never touched it. Among the people, some began to cry without knowing why. There was a vast feeling in their chests, not sorrow, but a kind of ancient longing without a name. A longing for something they once had before being born. One young man by the lakeside stood up slowly. He looked at the water and whispered, "Is it possible that we are all reflections of a time that hasn't begun?" No one answered, yet the water rippled slightly, as if smiling. A wind came from the north, carrying the damp scent of freshly watered earth. At that moment, the brightest star in the sky pulsed 3 times, and the lake quivered softly, as if returning a greeting from far away. That night ended without a marker. No one knew when dawn arrived, for the lake's light had slowly turned into a silvery hue, merging with the morning mist. When they finally noticed, the glow had vanished, leaving only still water like glass that had just swallowed a secret. Yet deep within each of their hearts, something had changed. They knew they had witnessed something that could never be explained, not by science, nor prayer, but by a memory that did not belong to time. As the morning mist began to thin, they noticed something disturbing the calm that had lingered from the night before. The land around the lake no longer looked the same. The trees that had stood in the same places the night before had shifted, as if their roots had walked quietly while all humans slept. The great stones that once marked the old paths now formed a perfect circle, like a symbol from no known origin. There were no signs of tools, no traces of hands, only a pattern so precise it seemed impossible to have been created without intention. Someone knelt to touch the ground and found it warm, as if something alive had just passed beneath. From the soil rose a faint metallic scent, like a mix of iron and rain. No one knew where it came from, yet everyone felt it carried memories they had never lived. An old man, known for his silence, walked slowly toward the water's edge. He gazed at his reflection in the pale morning lake. Within that reflection, something appeared that should not have been there. Behind his figure rose a tall shape, like a pillar made of solid light, stretching into the sky. There was no sound, no vibration, only a presence too vast to explain. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the pillar was gone. Yet the warmth in his chest remained like a message that could not be recalled in words. He whispered something no one heard, then walked back among the trees, which now stood like silent guardians of a newborn world. Meanwhile, the lake's surface began to stir strangely. Tiny bubbles rose and burst in a steady rhythm, as if the water itself were breathing. From a distance, someone called softly, pointing toward the center of the lake. There, a round, gray-green form was slowly rising to the surface. At first, they thought it was a rock, but its shape became too symmetrical, too smooth. As the water slid off its surface, they saw patterns resembling human palm lines, but far larger. The object floated briefly, then began to rotate slowly. In the soft morning light, it looked like a stone heart beating in slow motion. No one approached. They only watched in silence, as if witnessing the awakening of something older than understanding itself. The birds that usually filled the air with sound were gone. The stillness grew so complete that even breathing felt intrusive. A small child asked hesitantly, "Is it alive?" There was no reply, only long glances between the elders as though language had lost its purpose. Slowly, the object sank again, leaving behind ripples spreading outward. Each time the waves reached the shore, the ground trembled faintly, and from beneath came a low hum, like a note plucked from an immense hidden instrument. When the sun finally rose in full, the color of the world changed again. Everything appeared sharper, yet more foreign. The leaves glistened like wet metal. The air carried the scent of both earth and light. No one said the world had shifted, but all could feel it. They knew this place was no longer the same. Perhaps still within the same world, but beneath a layer they no longer understood. In that silence, the sound of small footsteps came. The child who had spoken earlier walked to the water's edge and crouched, staring into his reflection. There, his reflection did not stare back. Kit smiled. The child remained crouched at the edge of the water. A soft breeze brushed his hair, carrying the damp scent of mist not yet gone. He gazed at the lake's surface, now calm again, yet somehow different. The water seemed to clear, to alive. His reflection below did not mirror him anymore. When he moved his hand to the right, the reflection stayed still. When he inhaled, the reflection smiled. It was not a human smile, but something gentle and filled with comprehension, like the expression of one who has seen time itself from beginning to end. The boy frowned, though not from fear. He felt as though something far away was calling him, something that knew him more deeply than anyone ever could. Slowly, the water around the reflection began to ripple. Fine lines spiraled outward in perfect circular patterns, forming symbols unknown, perhaps a language not meant to be spoken, but to be felt. The boy stared unblinking, as if entranced by the rhythm of those movements. From the depths of the lake emerged a faint silver light. It did not blind, it soothed. Within the reflection, his image began to change. His hair lengthened like threads of light, his eyes glowed a pale blue, and fine lines ran along his form like glowing rivers. The face remained his, yet older, wiser, and somehow distant. Someone from afar called his name, but the child did not turn. He simply placed his palm upon the water where the reflection's face lay. The surface felt warm, not cold as it should have been. The touch made the light quiver, sending a gentle wave rippling outward, flowing through the roots, the stones, even into the air that suddenly grew heavier. All who stood around the lake felt the vibration within their chests, as if their hearts pulsed in the same rhythm. The air filled with a soft murmur, like the whisper of countless leaves brushing together, forming a melody without origin. Then came the voice. It did not come from any direction, but from within the mind of every person there. A whisper so ancient, so distant, and so soft that none dared to answer it. It spoke not in words, but in sensations and memories, in shadows of a world before light. The boy seemed to understand it, while the others stood frozen in awe. Slowly, he whispered to his reflection, his voice barely audible. "Is this your home?" The water shivered, and from the depths rose faint strands of light that danced across the surface. There were no words, yet everyone knew the answer from the water was yes. The sky brightened, and from the mist descended beams of light not born from the sun. They fell like threads, touching the lake's surface, then fading. Each time they landed, the lake returned a flicker skyward, as if two realms were exchanging greetings. The child smiled, not at his reflection, but at something deeper, something that only a heart untouched by the weight of the world could perceive. He rose slowly, took a deep breath, and looked toward the distant trees, now swaying softly as if breathing. No one knew what he had seen, but all could feel that something had shifted, both above and beneath the world. In that valley, morning moved more slowly than usual. The birds that once filled the branches with chatter were silent now, only fluttering their wings occasionally as if trying to make sense of a new wind blowing from the direction of the lake. The earth beneath the trees trembled gently, a steady vibration like the heartbeat of the world awakening from a long slumber. Thin mist hung in the air, dancing among the tall, ancient pines. Villagers stood at a distance, gazing toward the lake with a mix of fear and reverence. No human voices could be heard, only the soft murmur of wind that carried whispers without origin. Among the trees, the animals had changed as well. Wolves that usually stalked their prey beneath the dawnlight now sat calmly, heads bowed toward the valley. Owls emerged from their hiding places, eyes reflecting the silver glow from the lake. Even the insects moved slower, their wings beating in time with some unseen rhythm. Every living creature seemed to breathe together, sharing one quiet pulse that felt deeper than silence itself. There was no fear, only the sense that the world was looking at itself, recognizing something it had long forgotten. Meanwhile, the lake's surface reflected a sky that no longer looked natural. The clouds formed repeating patterns like carvings made by patient, deliberate hands. The lines curved inward, spiraling toward the center, calling something from above. The oldest woman in the village, a frail figure with hair white as snow and eyes nearly translucent, stepped out of her home. She walked without a cane, though her body seemed fragile, and each of her steps left a faint trace of light on the ground. No one dared to stop her. Everyone knew she was the last who still remembered the stories of when the world had no night. She stood at the lake's edge, her gaze piercing through the water's surface. The glow beneath the waves reflected on her face, making her wrinkles appear like living lines on a breathing map. "This is not new," she whispered, without turning to anyone. "This is the first breath that ever was. It only slept too long." Her voice sounded like a forgotten prayer, soft and steady, falling into the water like dew. The villagers could not understand her words, but they felt the weight of something vast moving, something beyond language or time. Then the ground around the lake began to shine, slowly and rhythmically, as though veins of light lived beneath the soil. Old stones half buried in moss revealed faint carvings that had been hidden for centuries. Circles and lines intertwined, the same patterns that now adorned the clouds above. No one knew who had carved them, yet they looked as though they had always been part of the earth, not made by human hands, but born of the land itself. The glow spread, linking each stone, each root, into a quiet, living network. A young deer emerged from the brush, stepping cautiously toward the water. With each step, the ground beneath its hooves shimmered as if greeting it. The creature lowered its head and licked the glowing surface of the lake. For a brief moment, its eyes lit up, then dimmed again. It looked around calmly, then trotted back into the forest, leaving faint trails of light on the grass behind it. Those who watched did not dare to speak, for they knew the world was speaking in a language older than prayer. From the distance came a soft vibration, like music rising from deep within the ground. The tones were uneven, yet harmonious, like a river singing to itself. There were no instruments, no players, only the voice of the earth. Some people closed their eyes, feeling the resonance move through their bodies, soothing, frightening, and beautiful all at once. It felt as though the world was remembering that it once held a life larger than their own, and now it was beginning to breathe again. Above, birds began to fly in patterns that mirrored the carvings on the stones. They moved slowly, without panic, as if following an ancient instruction. The wind grew gentler, carrying a sound from the north. It was not human, nor merely natural. It was a murmur, repeating softly, full of sorrow and peace. No one knew if it was a song or a summons. But everyone who heard it knew one certain thing. The world was awakening, and nothing could stop its return. Night arrived without color, like a gray cloth slowly being drawn over the valley. There was no dusk, no gradient of fading light, only a quiet shift that came without sign or time. The villagers realized it not because the sky turned dark, but because the sounds of the world suddenly stopped. The wind ceased to whisper, the leaves stopped trembling, and the murmur of the lake vanished, as if the earth itself was holding its breath in silence, too perfect to be natural. There was something else in the air, a kind of invisible weight, as though the air itself was thickening, turning into something older, denser, more real. They stood still, gazing around, then toward the lake that now reflected only the faint shape of a world losing form. Some began to see things they could not explain. Over the surface of the lake appeared lines of light swirling slowly, forming silhouettes that looked human but were not. These figures moved without sound, their faces blurred, yet their gestures graceful and deliberate, like participants in a ritual long forgotten. The villagers felt no fear, only a breathless wonder. A small child pointed toward the water, eyes wide with untouched curiosity. "They're singing," he whispered, and everyone who heard him knew he was not lying. The sound that followed was not a song in any familiar sense, but a soft resonance rising from the belly of the earth. It had no melody, yet it carried rhythm. It had no words, yet it carried meaning. Those closest to the water began to feel that rhythm pulsing in their chests, as if their hearts were trying to synchronize with it. Their eyes reflected the lake's glow, not as a mirror does, but as if they were absorbing something unseen. Among them, the old woman still stood unmoving, her eyes distant, her body straight, as though listening to something deeper than sound. Then the sky changed again. It did not grow darker, but became transparent, like a curtain being drawn aside. Behind it shimmered countless faint lights, tiny particles dancing without pattern. Slowly, though, they began to take form, swirling into the same circular patterns seen in the ancient stones and the clouds earlier that day. There was no color but white and silver, yet the light seemed to have texture, something that could almost be touched, almost felt upon the skin. The air grew warm, not like fire, but like the breath of someone whispering nearby. Some villagers began to notice other shadows among them, not their own, but those of figures walking quietly through their midst, slow and composed, made of the same light that poured from the sky. The beings were tall, their movements fluid like flowing water. They had no faces, no eyes, yet their presence was undeniable, so vivid that no one dared to blink. A young man reached out to touch one, and his hand passed through the air, though the air felt thick, like pushing through warm water. He pulled back, not afraid, only awestruck. At the edge of the lake, the light grew stronger. The surface rippled without wind, each ripple forming a glowing ring that widened and vanished, like the breath of something sleeping beneath. Within those ripples came flashes of imagery, too fast for most eyes to follow. Yet a few claimed to see scenes that did not belong to their world. A mountain burning with blue fire, a sea without waves, a sky filled with stars that moved as if they possessed thought. No one knew whether they had seen the past, the future, or something beyond both, but all agreed that this was not an ordinary night. Then a wind began to move from the north, carrying a scent strange yet familiar, like metal laced with the first rain after a long season. The air grew heavier, and every breath seemed to contain life. The children grew drowsy, but did not close their eyes, as if dreaming while awake. Around them, animals from the forest approached and stood beside the villagers without fear. A fox stood next to an old farmer, both gazing at the water with the same expression, silent, reverent, and surrendered. When the night reached its deepest stillness, the light from the lake bloomed softly, like a flower opening in silence. There was no sound, no flash, only a calm white radiance enveloping everything. In that light, all forms became silhouettes, but they knew something was gazing back from beyond the veil of the world. Perhaps it was the first gods, or merely the memory of the world itself. No one dared to guess. They simply stood there, letting the light touch their skin, enter their eyes, and fade slowly, like dew evaporating before dawn. The world felt peaceful, not because it was quiet, but because it had just remembered something long forgotten. Morning did not arrive with light. It emerged like a long breath from the earth, slow and without direction. Mist rose from the lake, not white as usual, but silvery, glimmering softly among wet stones and grass. There was no sun, yet the world brightened in another way, as though everything now carried its own source of light. Trees glowed faintly at the tips of their leaves. The soil shimmered with glass-like dust, and the air held an unfamiliar scent, a blend of burnt metal and wildflowers. Those who had stayed awake after the long night stood still, feeling as if they were no longer in the same place. Their village remained, but its shape seemed slightly shifted, like a painting nudged without erasing its borders. At the lakeside, the grass had grown taller overnight. Its stalks doubled in length, and its leaves dripped luminous dew that vanished upon touching the ground. A bird flew low, its wings reflecting the strange shifting light of the water below. In the sky, clouds moved without wind, guided by something subtler, perhaps the echo of the light still lingering in the air. The villagers watched it all in silence, sensing that ordinary words could not describe a world reshaping itself before their eyes. An old man known for wandering far to the north stepped to the water's edge and peered down. The surface was no longer clear like glass, but deep, immeasurably deep, like gazing into another night sky beneath the earth. He felt himself pulled toward it, as if the lake was no longer water, but a mirror into something beneath everything. In its reflection, he did not see himself, but the same figures from the night before, still walking within the fading light. They did not vanish. They simply moved farther away, descending into a place human sight could not follow. Then, from the depths, something soft emerged, like tendrils of mist rising from water. It coiled, then formed into symbols, not letters, not numbers, but shapes that felt familiar despite their strangeness. Tiny lights gathered around them, dancing in rhythm. A little girl whispered to her mother that the symbols looked like the carvings on the ancient stones in the southern hill. Stones once dismissed as idle markings from an unknown age. Now everyone began to understand that those stones were not relics, but perhaps warnings or windows once opened into another time. Meanwhile, the animals around began to show subtle changes. A deer stepped from the forest, its eyes glowing like molten bronze. Birds perched on branches and released tones that were not songs, but long-sustained harmonies, echoing in the air like instruments played by invisible hands. Particles of light still drifted, settling gently upon human skin, dissolving like soft dust. Some people felt something shift inside themselves, not pain, not comfort, but a quiet awareness impossible to explain. They sensed the world was listening now, and each breath they took became part of something greater than life. Beneath the ground, a low vibration pulsed, barely audible, yet strong enough to ripple grass and tremble water. It sounded like an ancient engine, or the heartbeat of the world slowly waking. No one knew its source, but some said they felt it in their bones. Some knelt, pressing palms to the soil, listening. Others wept without reason, overwhelmed by air too alive to bear. As the day unfolded without clear time, the light that had emerged from the lake began to seep into the earth, spreading slowly through the valley. The soil it touched hardened, then softened again, forming spirals like those carved into ancient stones across the world. No one knew who first carved those patterns. But now all realized they were not human creations. They were writings of the earth itself, shaped by unseen hands. In the midst of this transformation, the old woman who had stood closest to the lake now sat upon the ground, her eyes open yet unseeing. Her lips moved, whispering words no one could understand, perhaps a language older than speech. The villagers gathered around her, listening, but her voice was too low, too soft. Yet every time she spoke, the ground beneath her trembled slightly, and the light pulsed gently in rhythm with her breath. They realized she was not speaking. She was being translated by the earth. The lake no longer reflected the world above. It seemed calm, yet something moved within, slow and deep. Some claimed to see light glowing from its depths, unextinguished, even as the mist thickened. They believed it was not a remnant of the night before, but the source of everything. The first light once worshipped, not for its power, but for its beauty beyond comprehension. Now that light had returned not to be seen, but to be remembered. The world stood between sleep and awakening, and in the tender silence, humanity gazed upon its origin without truly understanding what it was witnessing. The earth began to pulse softly, as if it had its own breath. The rhythm came too deliberate to be chance, yet too gentle to be called a threat. From the damp dew-laden surface, small ripples rose like the heartbeat of something waking from a long sleep. Grass bent, sand quivered, and small stones rotated slightly before settling again. The sound grew clearer, not heard through ears, but felt within the chest, as though the heart of the earth and the hearts of humans now beat in the same tempo. Those standing in the field slowly knelt without realizing it, sensing they were before something older than all that had ever been known. No one spoke, for words seemed useless in the face of such magnitude. From beneath the soil, the light that had once filled the valley shifted in hue. It was no longer white or silver, but layered, pulsing like blood beneath the earth's skin. Colors unseen by human eyes emerged, neither red nor blue, but something between, as though born from the meeting of unknown shades. Each time the light reached the surface, the surrounding air grew warm and moist, carrying the scent of minerals and fresh sap. Trees trembled softly, their leaves brushing together in whispers. Some branches began to grow downward, reaching into the earth as if yearning to touch the light's source. The world seemed inverted, as though all things were relearning their direction and form. Then something beyond explanation appeared. The ground cracked slightly, not from force, but from something gentle pressing upward. From the fissure flowed a thin stream of golden liquid, not water, not fire, but a fluid light. It moved slowly, tracing patterns across the ground, swirling as though writing words readable only by those who remembered the age before language. Each time a full circle was completed, the earth trembled faintly and the air grew heavy, as if the world were holding its breath. A young man, brave through curiosity, stepped forward and knelt to touch the glowing stream. As his fingers neared it, the air felt utterly still. No wind, no sound only. A thick, dense silence as if time had stopped. When his fingertip met the light, there was no pain, no heat, only the coolness of mountain water. Yet in that instant, his eyes widened and he drew a deep breath. He saw beyond this world not with his eyes, but with something else within him. The earth was no longer soil and stone, but layers of light spiraling together, like the body of a creature made of time itself. He fell to his knees, not unconscious, only too awed to stand. When he spoke, his voice trembled, uttering words that sounded foreign even to himself. He named things that had never been heard before, names no human could have invented. Those who listened felt as though they had known those names once, perhaps from an ancient dream before their birth. Each name sent vibrations through the air, and the ground's light pulsed in response. It felt as though the world was rereading its oldest records, opening a page long sealed. Animals fell silent. A great bird landed upon a stone at the lake's edge, its feathers reflecting the same layered colors of the ground's light. It gazed at the people calmly, not afraid, not hostile, but recognizing them as part of the same story. The bird opened its beak slowly, releasing a deep, resonant tone, echoing like sound from a vast cavern. The valley vibrated with it, and people sensed that words beyond their comprehension were being spoken again after millennia of sleep. The light responded by spiraling faster, forming new symbols among the old. The sky above changed gradually. There was still no sun, yet the air's hue turned from silver to gold, then to the soft color of warm ash. The light from the ground lifted slightly, forming thin pillars that shimmered like breathing vapor. From afar, they looked like towering human silhouettes, standing motionless, gazing upon the earth with patience. No one knew if they were real or reflections of something deep below. Yet those who saw them felt that the world was remembering something that existed before humankind named all things. The light was no longer a mere phenomenon, but a memory. And perhaps that memory was what the long silent earth was now trying to awaken once more. The light rising from the ground slowly began to take shape. 'Twas no longer a flow or pattern, but something coalescing, spinning gently like a whirlpool in a still pond. Each swirl released tiny sparks that did not fade upon touching the air. They lingered, drifting among the hanging mist. From afar, it resembled a blooming flower, though its petals were made of nothing earthly. They were translucent, layered, and within each layer moved subtle breaths. Those who watched could not tell whether what they saw was alive or merely energy learning to become form. Some whispered it was the earth's spirit awakening from slumber. Others thought it was memory trying to become flesh again. Yet no one truly knew, for whenever they drew closer, The form shifted, evading sight like fog, changing direction with silence. In the middle of the field, the light continued merging, creating soft shadows that curved like limbs or leaves, then slowly formed a standing figure. It had no face, no voice, yet each passing wind made it quiver as if trying to speak. The sound came not from a mouth, but from the air itself, vibrating in sympathy. Its tone was long, calm, and rhythmic, like a prayer spoken by the earth to itself. Those who heard did not understand the meaning, but felt something deep each. Tone carried memories they had never lived, yet somehow recognized. The light was not mere radiance. It was a language spoken through movement and time, not through sound and letters. The old woman who had sat near the lake now rose slowly. Her eyes were still blank, yet her body moved in harmony with the light's rhythm, like one dancing in a dream. Each step left faint glowing traces that faded after moments. When she lifted her hands, the light around her quickened, as if recognizing her. The people stepped back, not from fear, but reverence, sensing something greater unfolding. They knew she was no longer only human. She had become a bridge between what was seen and what was hidden. No words left her lips, yet the earth answered every gesture with a gentle tremor. The sky gradually lost its color. The once warm light turned pale, but deeper. From the end of the valley, a cool wind arrived, carrying shimmering dust that glowed like living ash. The dust swirled, following the light's movement from the ground. And within it, faint shadows darted too swiftly to track. Some thought it was only reflection, but a small child pointed and said there were faces within the dust, faces not human, not animal. They looked back with equal curiosity. They did not smile nor threaten, merely observed, as though remembering something nearly lost. The light on the ground began shaping a new pattern. This time, not circular, but twin spirals intertwining endlessly. From the center rose a larger form than before. It appeared as a body incomplete, its parts shifting between solid and luminous. Long hands formed from mist, and each pause in movement left a brief wave of warmth before the air turned cold again. There was no fear among the witnesses, only deep quiet. They knew they were watching something not meant to be understood, something to be accepted in stillness, like seeing the sea for the first time and realizing water has no end. A deer stepped forward, its bronze-lit eyes calm. It stood before the light shape and bowed its head. The glowing form bent slightly, returning the gesture. In that moment, everyone felt something stir within, a sensation beyond words, a mingling of awe and sorrow, loss and recognition. They realized what they witnessed was not creation, but remembrance. The world was recalling its first form, and they were merely witnesses to an awakening that history could never faithfully record. There was no sound, no song, only the earth's pulse, now steady as a song from a time with no beginning. The air grew heavy, and the dancing light slowed. The form dissolved, turning into glowing mist that spread across the valley. In moments, calm returned. The soil remained warm. The wind carried faint scents of metal and wild flowers. Yet far beneath the earth, beyond all sense, something continued to throb like a heart newly awakened, waiting for its time to rise again. Night came without stars. The sky was an empty canvas without direction, and beneath it, the people who had witnessed the event eventually fell asleep where they stood. None meant to sleep, yet their eyes closed as though the earth itself had drawn them inward. They did not dream as they once did. There were no houses, no faces, no sense of time, only an infinite expanse where a soft voice called from afar. It spoke not in words, but in feeling. Each person heard it differently, yet all knew it was the same voice, the one that had been waiting for them since before birth. In that dream, they saw a world without sky. Only an ocean of calm light, moving slowly like breath. From afar, immense silhouettes emerged, neither solid nor vague, standing upon something that was not ground but a vertical current of time. These figures did not speak, yet from their bodies flowed lines of light-forming patterns in the air, spirals, waves, and arcs that moved like an ancient language. Each pattern had a tone, and each tone carried a call. Those dreaming began to recall things they had never lived. They understood the meanings without learning them, knew the answers without the questions. The dream felt more real than the waking world. One of the great figures bowed, and from its body came something like a glowing seed. It drifted downward, changing form with each layer of light. It passed seed to fragment, fragment to sound, sound to name. The name was not personal, but collective, as though belonging to all humankind. When the name was spoken without voice, their chests trembled, and suddenly they knew they were being summoned to remember their own origin. Not the origin of flesh, but the origin of awareness, the place where seeing and being were once the same. The ocean of light began to tremble. Every tiny particle within it shaped into a vast pattern, a delicate web binding all that had lived and died. The dreamers felt themselves becoming part of that web. There was no distance, no individuality, only one great breath pulsing from an unseen center. They felt weightless, bodiless, yet filled with memory older than the world itself. In that state, they began to understand that all they had ever feared, darkness, death, solitude, were merely shadows of something deeper, something they had once forgotten in order to live in a limited world. Then, within that stillness, came a new vibration. Not like the light's earlier pulse, this one was heavier, deeper. From beneath the sea of light appeared a thin crack, and from it rose a slow whirl of darkness. The light and the dark met, not to fight, but to recognize each other. At that point of contact, the light grew stronger, then shifted colors from white to gold, from gold to a soft red, like a newborn sun. Everyone dreaming felt something within them begin to burn, gently shedding an old layer. Some wept in their sleep, some smiled, others simply breathed deeply, as if remembering something unspeakable. At last, the voice spoke again, no longer distant, but from within themselves. "You are not visitors," it said without sound. "You are reflections of a memory learning to take shape." Then the dream began to dissolve. The light fractured into countless pieces, each one falling back into its sleeper's body. When dawn arrived, they awoke with the same eyes that had just witnessed something that could never be described, yet could never be denied. They did not speak, yet all knew they had seen the same thing: the world before the world. Dawn came this time in a way never seen before. There was no line of light on the horizon, no pink or orange hue slowly rising from the east. Instead, light appeared from beneath the ground, creeping gently between roots and stones, as if the earth itself were igniting from within. The soil surface pulsed softly, like a vast creature breathing for the first time after 1,000 years of sleep. The grass swayed, not from wind, but from subtle waves moving through the ground currents of light following the rhythm of the world's heartbeat. Those who had just awakened from the long dream gazed around with blank yet knowing eyes. The air was warm, filled with the scent of metal and wet soil, the fragrance of a world newly born. Beneath their feet, they could sense something, not a sound, but a vibration repeating in patterns. If one stood still enough, they would realize the pattern was language. The earth was speaking, not with words, but with rhythm, pauses, and pulses rich with meaning. Every tremor was a sentence, every silence a punctuation mark of something ancient. The old woman who had been the conduit the night before slowly rose. The light from underground illuminated her face, turning every wrinkle into a glowing map leading towards something vast. She closed her eyes and whispered, "The earth is remembering." Her words echoed softly among the trees, as though the air itself repeated them. People began to understand that what they witnessed was not a miracle, but the awakening of something older than history. The ground beneath them was no longer just Matuit was aware. They were merely fragments of its returning memory. In the distance, the northern mountain glowed faintly at its peak, like embers waiting to breathe. The river shimmered not from reflected sky, but because its water carried living particles of light. Some bent down and saw their reflections, yet the reflections did not move. They stared back, silent, as if trying to speak something unspoken. Children, unburdened by fear, reached out to touch the surface, laughing as small rings of light formed around their fingers before sinking into their skin, leaving warmth in their chests. Above the valley, birds began to fly in strange formations, tracing near geometric shapes across the sky. They moved as if following a command only those who had heard the earth could understand. A gentle sound, almost like music, filled the air, not made by any instrument but born from the meeting of soil and air vibrating together in one note. That note was low, deep, and soothing, like the heart of the world singing to itself. Some wept without knowing why, perhaps because the feeling in their chest was too vast, or perhaps because they knew that from this day on, the world would never be the same again. Not through destruction, but through awareness. The earth was no longer a place to live, was an old friend finally speaking again after an eternity of silence. The northern mountains slowly opened like a stone flower that had taken millennia to bloom. There was no eruption, no quick only, a gentle exhalation rising from the earth's depths. From its fissures flowed light, not lava or flame, but a living liquid that pulsed with shifting hues: pale blue, soft gold, then silver again. The air around the mountain trembled faintly, and every rock in the valley seemed to echo it, as if the whole world breathed together. People stood still beneath the sky with no east or west, staring at the mountain that now appeared like the open eye of the earth, watching them not with intention, but with awareness. From within that light, a shape emerged. It did not fall nor rise, but coalesced slowly like mist, forming a body. It could not be called human nor animal, for its form changed each time it was seen, sometimes like a tree trunk, then a river, then a bird unfolding wings of light, then again a drifting veil. It had no edges, no shadow, yet each of its movements left delicate trails in the air that soon dissolved. The people understood that the being was not something entering their world, but something coming out of it, the consciousness of the earth finding form to gaze upon itself. The old woman stood in the valley, her face glowing in the gentle light of the mountain. She smiled faintly, as if recognizing something long awaited. Her lips moved soundlessly, but the light pulsing from the mountain seemed to respond, breathing in rhythm with her. Children ran closer, then stopped, feeling an unfamiliar warmth in their chests. The air was filled with tiny drifting particles of light, and with each breath, those particles entered their lungs, kindling something invisible inside them. There was no fear, only a quiet peace, as though they had returned to something ancient and once known. The being of light began to move down the slope. It did not walk, but glided, touching the ground softly, and wherever it touched, new shapes rose from the earth, glowing leaves, stones smooth as skin, water flowing upward before gently falling again like a thin curtain. The land transformed into something more alive than before, as if a painting were slowly remembering that it was alive. In the midst of it, humans could only stand still, witnesses to a world learning again how to breathe. A black bird crossed the valley, the only creature untouched by the light. Yet when its shadow fell to the ground, the soil beneath shimmered briefly, as though even darkness now had its place in this returning awareness. The sky shifted colors, not blue nor red, but something unknown, somewhere between metal and fog. A color no human eye had ever seen. The mountain continued to pulse, sending gentle waves across the valley, each one a call that demanded no reply. In the distance, the lake, the heart of the earlier light, lay calm. But beneath its surface, something moved in rhythm with the mountain's breath. The water trembled, forming circles upon circles that merged into one great pattern, like the symbols that had once risen from the mist. That pattern was now joined with soil, air, and human bodies alike. The first light was no longer outside. The myth had returned within, a pulse beneath their breath, a memory that could never fade. In that almost sacred silence, a small child looked toward the mountain and said softly, "They didn't come to stay. They came to remember us." No one replied. Only a gentle wind passed, carrying the scent of burnt metal and wild flowers. In the sky, the luminous being paused, then slowly faded, not vanishing, but blending into the air, the stone, and the rhythm of every human heart that had witnessed it. The world was no longer divided between life and death, between light and darkness. Everything now shared the same breath, pulsing in perfect stillness. The days after the descent of the light felt as though time had lost its shape. The sun still rose and fell, yet its rays no longer seemed to come from any single direction. Shadows no longer clung to things, but wandered across the ground like memories refusing to stay still. People began to realize they were not merely witnesses to something extraordinary. They had become part of something greater than themselves. They woke with a strange feeling in their chests, as though their hearts now beat not only for their bodies, but also for the earth breathing along with them. Each step they took left behind a faint glow that faded slowly, like breath dissolving into air. No one understood how or why, yet everyone agreed the world had changed subtly, like an old song remembered without knowing where it was first heard. In the villages at the mountain's base, sound itself had changed. Every spoken word carried a gentle resonance not of tone, but of meaning. When one person called another's name, the air around them seemed to quiver, and the one being called felt a presence stirred deep within. Language had softened its boundaries, becoming something more than communication. Sometimes people simply looked into each other's eyes, and that was enough to share entire stories. It was as if a delicate web connected them all, a web woven of light and ancient memory. They began to dream differently. In sleep, they saw places they had never visited, yet felt strangely familiar. There was an endless sea beneath a pulsing sky, a tree growing upside down from clouds, a voice speaking without words, and all of it felt real when they awoke. Some said these dreams were how the light spoke to their consciousness. Others believed the earth was teaching them gently through visions that hovered between waking and sleep. No one wished to interpret them too clearly, for they all knew that what is most true cannot be spoken. The children were the most sensitive to this change. They often stopped in the middle of play, gazing upward as though hearing music adults could not. Sometimes they drew symbols in the dirt, shapes resembling the patterns once seen upon the lake. They did not know their meaning, but their hands moved with uncanny certainty, as though repeating something done 1,000 ages ago. The elders watched silently, understanding that whatever was happening could not be stopped or explained. The world was remembering itself, and humankind was simply part of the process. At night, light still shimmered faintly at the mountain's summit, pulsing like the heart of the world. Yet people no longer saw it as something foreign. It had become part of their sleeping rhythm, part of the whisper between silences. Within each person now glowed something soft and unseen, felt more than witnessed. When they closed their eyes, they knew that whatever had come from the mountain now lived within them and would never leave. The world had erased the boundary between the real and the remembered, between time that has passed and time still waiting. In that silence, humanity understood they no longer sought the light, for they had become the light itself. Seasons changed without notice. There was no longer a way to count days, for time had lost its shape like a river widening into a lake. The grass grew taller, the air heavier with the scent of faint metal and wet earth. The world was no longer divided between day and night, for light now existed even within darkness, like an ember resting beneath the skin of the earth. People lived by a new rhythm, not measured by clocks, but by a subtle pulse rising from within. They no longer waited for events to happen, for everything had become part of an endless unfolding. There was no beginning, No end, only the continuation of something that had existed long before language could name it. Some began to wander far, leaving their villages without clear destination. They spoke of a call coming from certain places, like an echo whispering names they had never heard but somehow remembered. In forests, among stones, along the sea's edge, they found the same sign circles etched into soil, gentle lights beneath the water, faint vibrations in their ears like songs without origin. They knew they were not lost, for each step drew them deeper into something that felt like home, forgotten by the world. At the mountain's peak, the lights still pulsed softly. One night, a small group of travelers climbed toward it, following its rhythm as though it were the heartbeat they carried within. At the summit, they found no temple, no sacred stone, no god waiting. Only stillness, and in its center, a small hollow in the earth, glowing with breath-like light that never faded. One among them knelt and touched it, and in that instant felt his entire life drawn into a single point without direction. He saw himself in pasts and futures, in countless bodies living and dying without pause. There was no pain there, only quiet understanding that all lives were waves of the same light. When he opened his eyes, tears flowed down his face, not from sorrow, but from the weight of remembrance. He told the others that the mountain was not the birthplace of gods, but the place where the world remembered itself. That the first light had not come from the sky, but from the heart of the earth, from the silence before all names. The others said nothing, yet understood. They knew the secret was not meant to be kept or told, but lived. That night they sat around the gentle glow, speaking no words, listening only to the breath of soil and sky. The wind carried fine, glittering dust that clung to their skin like stars choosing to rest upon human flesh. In that silence, they felt something shift again, not outside, but within, in the place unreachable by thought. The world was no longer merely a dwelling, but something breathing with them. The first light had become a consciousness intertwined with all that lived. And when they descended to the valley the next morning, they carried nothing but a new gaze upon a world that was no longer strange, yet not entirely known. The world had become a mirror of something formless, and humanity saw itself within it for the first time without fear. Time, no longer measured, began to thicken the space between past and present until both slowly merged into a single, endless breath. The world lived between sleep and waking, and humankind had grown accustomed to that strange calm, like creatures who had long abandoned speech to learn the language of silence. They worked, walked, slept, and spoke more slowly, as though every act had to be translated by the earth before becoming real. Beneath a pale sky, they no longer sought direction, for all directions now led back to the same place, the heart of the pulse turning beneath the world. Among them, some began to dream in new ways. These dreams were not memories or wishes, but windows into another layer of reality. They dreamed of cities made of clear stone, where every wall breathed like living skin, and where light flowed through them like blood. In those dreams, they walked among beings with no fixed form, yet all recognized them as long-lost kin. Each morning when they awoke, the air still carried traces of that place, faint fragrance of stone rain and flowers that had never bloomed on earth. The elders began to speak softly of something once mentioned only in ancient songs of an age, when the first light did not merely illuminate the world, but composed its awareness. They said that in those days the earth did not separate itself from the beings upon it. Everything was one, and difference was merely how light learned to know itself. But something happened. The light divided itself into many pieces, creating time, creating memory, and in the end, creating distance. Humanity was born from those fragments, carrying a spark of the world's awareness, but losing the memory of its origin. And now, after countless turns of time, the world was closing that distance, again one pulse after another, slowly but surely. In a mist-filled valley, a group of children sat around a fire that did not come from wood, but from the air itself. The fire was still, neither hot nor colored. They listened to the old woman who had once spoken as the earth's translator. Her voice was faint, nearly inaudible. She said the world was dreaming, and humanity was the conscious part of that dream. Every step, every breath, every glance was an echo of the first light, trying to remember itself. She paused, then added softly that if the world ever fully awakened, everything called life might dissolve back into a greater awareness, like ripples returning to the lake that birthed them. Yet there was no fear among them, only a soft stillness, and the quiet knowing that all things were always moving toward that point, the moment when the real and the remembered would no longer be separate. That night, beneath a sky slowly losing its color, they saw the northern mountain emit a faint light, like the final breath of an unfinished dream. They knew then, in that profound silence, that the world was speaking to itself through them. And perhaps, for the first time, humanity was no longer a spectator to the mystery. But part of the sentence the earth was still in the middle of saying. The sky turned milky gray, and the wind began to carry a sound that could not be translated. In every valley, along every coastline, a faint resonance vibrated like a breath passing through time. There were no words, only a frequency that touched the bone, making all who heard it feel as if they were being remembered by something far older than anything that had ever existed. Some closed their eyes and listened, while others stared blankly toward a horizon that slowly glowed from within, not from the sun, but from something unknown awakening beneath the earth. The world felt as though it was taking a long breath, trying to remember itself before speaking again. Nights grew longer, and among the dim stars appeared a new light that did not flicker like ordinary ones. It was steady, calm, as though it watched the earth with invisible eyes. Those who still charted the sky with their instruments noted that the star patterns had shifted in ways no science could explain. Yet for those who lived in remote places, the mountains, the forests, the restless shores, it was no surprise. They knew the sky wasn't changing. 'Twas revealing another layer that had long been hidden by time. To them, it was not a phenomenon, but a calling. Some began to walk without aim, following a sound they could only hear in silence. Some went north, toward the mountain that still glowed softly, like an ember that refused to die. Others went south, toward plains whispering, as though their grasses were praying. Still others went toward the sea, drawn by something calling from beneath the water, not with words, but with a pulse that touched their hearts. None carried provisions, none said goodbye, for all understood that the call was not to go away, but to return. Amid all these wanderings, an old man wrote upon a flat stone with a shard of metal not to be read, but so the world could remember the shape of writing. He drew lines and circles that flowed like rivers, pausing each time the wind arrived, as though waiting for an answer. He knew no one would understand these symbols, not even himself, for he merely copied what the earth whispered into his thoughts. He felt like the hand of something vast, something that had slept for ages and was now awakening, writing itself back through humankind. At a still lake, a group of young women stood upon the surface without sinking. They did not speak, only listened to the sounds rising from within the earth. The water around them quivered softly, forming patterns that shifted like an unknown language. When dawn came, they walked back to shore, leaving faint spiral marks that slowly faded like messages legible only to time. The villagers who saw it dared not approach. They only knew something was happening that was not meant to be witnessed, only received. Within the thickening silence, the earth seemed to be preparing for something. Trees stopped moving, even as wind passed through, and rivers ceased to ripple, even when it rained. Everything held still, waiting for a moment yet to arrive. In that vast stillness, someone whispered that the world was awaiting a command from the first light. Like a disciple waiting for its teacher to rise from a long slumber. Yet no one knew whether that moment would come as light or as a darkness so deep it no longer inspired fear. And on the seventh night after the first sound was heard, the earth trembled softly, like someone awakening from a long dream. The tremor destroyed nothing, but every living being felt their body hum gently from within. In that instant, many wept without knowing why. They could not tell if it was joy or loss. All they knew was that the world had finally opened its eyes, though it was not yet fully awake. In the sky, the steady light began to pulse like a heart taking its first beat. The night after the tremor, many people dreamed the same dream. They saw an endless sea, but it was not made of water, was the reflection of their own thoughts, rippling and shifting like clouds that could think. In that dream, they walked upon the silent sea. And every step created ripples that formed faces, some from the past, some from the future. Some saw loved ones long gone, others saw their younger selves, and some beheld worlds that had never existed yet felt strangely familiar. When they awoke, they carried the sense that the boundary between sleeping and waking had dissolved like salt in water. With each passing day, those dreams grew brighter, more real. They were no longer visions confined to the mind, but landscapes waiting beneath the surface of the world, ready to be walked upon. Some people began to meet within the same dream, conversing in a language they had never learned but somehow understood perfectly. The words in that place were not made of sound, but of resonance, direct transmissions of thought, purer than speech. Scientists tried to explain it as synchronized neural activity, but even they stopped writing reports once they began to share the same dreams themselves. Then came the night when every human on Earth fell asleep at the same time. No one knew how it happened. Clocks everywhere froze for 72 minutes, And during that time, the world became a single consciousness. There were no nations, no languages, no I and you. All became one long breath containing the memory of every living thing since the beginning of time. The ocean dreamed of the first fish that swam within it. The trees dreamed of the seeds they once protected. The mountains dreamed of the pressure that gave them birth from fire. The world became one vast dream, and within it, humankind finally remembered itself not as a ruler, but as a living cell within the larger body of the earth. When they awoke, the sun had changed. Its light was gentler, now no longer burning, but warm like the skin of something smiling. The sky seemed closer, as if the line between air and space had thinned. Many wept, not from fear, but from the knowledge that something immense had happened, something no words could hold. Everything alive now carried a small spark of that light within, pulsing in rhythm with the world. No one was truly alone anymore, for every thought was bound by invisible threads of light, weaving every heart into the great fabric called existence. And among that web of joined awareness, a single voice was heard from within the earth, soft as a mother, whispering to her child, "Now you remember." No one knew to whom the voice spoke, but everyone who heard it felt a warm trembling in their chest. The world no longer sought meaning, because meaning had become breath itself. The days that followed felt like newly created time, as if the world were rewriting itself from the beginning, yet without haste. There was no longer a clear divide between morning and night, between rain and drought, for everything now pulsed in the same rhythm. The ground felt softer underfoot, as though it breathed slowly, and trees grew without direction, following patterns visible only to those who had opened their inner sight. The sea trembled with a low hum that only the heart could hear, and winds carried whispers from mountain to plain, from forest to city, from soul to soul. The world seemed to be learning to speak its new language not with words, but with motion and resonance, with vibration and light. Humans no longer built cities as before. They raised no walls, laid no straight roads, stacked no stones into towers. Instead, they began planting buildings as they would trees. Homes grew from seeds placed in the soil, spreading tendrils that became living walls and roofs of leaves that changed color with the hours of the day. Light from within the earth flowed through the roots of these structures, making them glow gently at night. There was no fire, no electricity, yet the world remained bright because everything now held its own quiet light, like a memory still breathing. People walked among those homes lightly, no longer burdened by time or ambition, only guided by an endless curiosity. They no longer wrote books, for written language felt too narrow to hold what they now felt. Instead, they sang not to be heard, but to send vibrations into the air, joining countless other songs rising from every direction. The songs blended into one vast wave crawling over the world, seeping through water, rock, and sky, turning everything into part of the same symphony. There was no conductor, no audience, only harmony blooming like flowers from a shared consciousness. Mountains answered the sea with deep echoes. Forests replied to the sky with trembling leaves, and humanity responded with the measured breath of the earth's own heart. Some began to realize the world was no longer a place to live in, but a body growing with them. When they sat by a lake or beneath a tree, they could feel the earth's subtle flow rising through their spine, as if they themselves were roots piercing the soil. Every small movement sent ripples that touched things far beyond sight. A bird flapped its wings in the mountains, and someone in the fields felt a gentle stirring in their chest. No action was separate from the world, for the world itself had become living consciousness, and each soul was its pulse. In the sky, clouds began forming patterns no longer by chance, but as if writing reminders in vast celestial script. Each evening, the clouds shaped themselves into circles and lines faintly, resembling the ancient symbols once born from the first light. People watched in silence, not to interpret, but to remember. Nature had become an open book, its letters written in wind and radiance, readable only to those patient enough to listen. Beneath the earth, the ancient tunnels long hidden began to tremble once more, not from machinery or quake, but because the planet itself was singing. Its song was low, deep, almost at the edge of hearing, yet strong enough to stir the roots of mountains and ignite stones within them. Those stones glowed with the colors of the first light, pale blue, and faded, gold signifying the world's act of remembrance. From those depths, air rose slowly, carrying the scent of wet soil, the fragrance of origin. And humankind, now living without calendars or written history, began to understand that they were no longer beings apart from the world. They had become notes within a greater song, and the world, in its vast silence, was the singer who never ceased to breathe. In that new consciousness, nothing was higher or lower, only harmony, growing softly and endlessly, like light flowing through the fingers of time. There was no longer a boundary between humans and the earth. They now shared the same breath, filling one another like two sides of a single vast awareness. The sea spoke through the sound of the heart, and humans answered through the rhythm of their footsteps on the sand. Trees shivered softly whenever someone took a deep breath, as if they too felt the same peace. The world was no longer silent, yet not noisy either. It spoke through small things, the ripple of water, the shifting of shadows through the day, the faint dripping light from the edges of leaves. Everything formed one endless sentence, understood only by those who listened with their entire being. The sky now looked different. It was no longer an empty expanse above, but a flowing ocean of consciousness. Clouds moved, not by wind, but by thought. When people dreamed, their dreams shaped the clouds, sometimes as smiling faces, sometimes as open hands, sometimes as streams of light drifting toward the horizon. Night changed too. The stars no longer appeared as dots, but as open eyes gazing from a depth that could no longer be called sky. People did not look to the stars for guidance anymore, but listened to the faint hums they sent, like distant songs needing no words. The rivers began flowing the other way, not from any natural shift, but because the world now breathed in a different rhythm. Water climbed from sea to mountain, carrying minerals and light once buried deep. On every rock it touched, fine patterns formed like veins on human skin as if the earth were revealing its fingerprints. Animals walked beside humans without fear, Deer wandered among homes without running. Birds perched on children's shoulders, and wolves sat by the riverside beside those in meditation. The world no longer knew predator or prey. All was movement within the same living being. Some humans began to change in ways beyond explanation. Their eyes glowed softly in the dark, not because they saw more, but because the world reflected itself through them. Their skin seemed to breathe, their hair stirred, though no wind blew. They did not become gods, yet they were no longer merely human. They were bridges between what once saw and what now wished to be seen. In their dreams, they did not recall the past, but walked through futures unbound by time, through cities of light, where every stone, leaf, and breath carried the memory of existence itself. The nights grew long and calm. There was no fear of darkness, for darkness was now understood as resting light. Children slept on the ground, listening to the heartbeat of the earth beneath them. The elders sat quietly beneath the stars, realizing that all they had ever sought had returned in a form beyond words. No prayers were spoken, for the world itself had become prayer. In every inhalation was unspoken gratitude. In every exhale, wordless surrender. The mountains that once seemed distant now appeared close, not because they moved, but because human perception had changed. Distance was no longer something to cross, but something to feel within. One could close their eyes and sense the edge of the world without taking a step. The world was no longer divided by space, but united by awareness that flowed from point to point like a gentle, unending current. Within it, humanity was only one pulse in the great heartbeat of existence. No one knew how long this state lasted. Perhaps a single season, perhaps millennia, for time itself had lost its shape. Everything felt eternal, yet constantly changing, like a song that never ceased, yet always sounded new. In that warm quiet, the earth turned calmly around the sun, which was no longer merely a star, but the center of consciousness, gazing upon the world with a love that needed no name. That long night slowly deepened into something beyond darkness and light. The world began to dream, and within its dream, it formed shapes that could not be called beings, yet were not mere shadows. They appeared from the thin mist, drifting between forest and valley, moving without steps, speaking without words. Some looked like humans made of gentle light, while others seemed like echoes of an unknown age, walking among trees as memories searching for their bodies. No one knew where they came from, only that whenever they passed, the ground trembled faintly, as if remembering something long buried. People sensed their presence without fear. They did not come to haunt, nor to help. They simply were, like the world, meditating upon itself. Sometimes, when fog rolled softly across the ground, one of the figures would sit by the river, gazing at the starlit reflection as though speaking to the falling light from the sky. Children saw them and laughed, thinking they were imaginary friends. But the elders knew better. What they saw was not illusion. The world was learning to recognize itself, and those shapes were its awakening memories. They had no language, yet their movements carried profound meaning. When one walked across a field, the seeds sleeping beneath the soil began to pulse gently, like the slow heartbeat of returning life. When they paused beneath an ancient tree, The dry leaves fell in a steady rhythm, as if in prayer. Wherever they passed, the air thickened with clarity, heavy with presence, as though the earth itself focused its thoughts there. None could touch them, yet everyone who saw them felt touched by something tender, as if the shadow brushed the forgotten side of the soul that still knew how to dream. On certain nights, one of the luminous beings stood on the tallest hill, gazing at the star-filled sky. From its body rose a slender stream of light, drifting upward like a fine thread returning to its source. People below watched in silence, and some wept without knowing why. They felt they were witnessing something older than the world itself, something that existed before time had a name. The light climbed higher, then faded, leaving behind only the warmth of silence, like the final breath of a long dream. After that night, the world grew quieter, though not empty. It was the stillness after a song ends, when the last note still trembles in the air. People walked softly, spoke gently, knowing something had shifted. They no longer sought miracles, for the world itself had become one. In every reflection of water, in every breath of wind, there was the feeling that the earth was dreaming of itself, and humanity was merely part of its dream. Some began to draw symbols on the ground circles and signs they could not understand. They did not know why, only that they must leave a mark, so the world would know they had witnessed that night. Some marks endured, merging with stone and roots, becoming symbols that future people would call myths. Yet they were only the language of the earth's dream, written by the hands of humans still awake. Time went on, though it no longer felt like flow. Day and night came as two breaths alternating gently. The world became a calm heart, sending life to every corner. Those who had seen the light beings began to fade, not from death, but because they slowly merged with the air. Their bodies grew light, their steps left no trace, and one morning they were gone, leaving behind only a whisper. Remember when the world dreamed? Night fell again, but now there was no fear, no sense of loss. Only a deep calm, like an ocean aware of its own vastness. The world turned slowly, carrying the dream within. It buried in the ground, in the air, in the light of stars. No one knew when the dream would awaken again, or whether humans would remember it when that time came. All that remained was the story, told in a soft voice so as not to wake the sleeping world. When morning came for the last time in that story, there was no color known to human eyes. The sky was neither blue nor gray, but something resembling light not yet finished becoming color. The wind descending from the mountains carried a scent without a name, like the meeting of the first rain and the last stardust. Across the valley, everything alive rested in quiet composure, as though the world was holding its own breath. No bird song, no rustling leaves only. The soft sigh of time passing through the cracks between what was real and what was remembered. The world stood at the edge of something unspeakable, and within that silence, all boundaries began to dissolve. The people who still remained in the valley stood motionless, their bodies bathed in the lingering glow that had become part of the air. They no longer looked to the sky for signs, for they knew all they sought was already within themselves. Every breath carried the same faint vibration, as if the earth and humankind now shared one rhythm. There were no prayers, no please-only gratitude born without words. The world had changed, not into something new, but into what it had always been, a form that could only be felt by those still quiet amid the movement of all things. At the mountain's peak, now calm, the fissure that once released the first light was covered by a thin mist. Yet within that mist, something still pulsed softly, like a heart not done dreaming. Some said they could hear a faint sound, like a song within stone. It had no melody, yet those who heard it felt lighter, as though the world spoke in a tone beyond meaning. Those who heard chose to sit silently and dissolve into the echo, knowing there was no point seeking the end of something that never truly began. At the lake beneath the mountain, the water had grown so clear the sky seemed to lie below, not above. Its surface reflected not faces, but the awareness gazing at itself. Every ripple carried memories of those long nights when light descended and humankind learned to see itself. Now the ripples wandered aimlessly, fading into stillness, leaving behind a single circle that never broke. The world seemed to be writing its own ending, not with ink, but with breath. Meanwhile, in the far plains, forests that once roared with sound now grew differently. The trees shifted slightly each time the wind passed, as if adjusting to listen to something distant. Old branches hung low, reflecting a soft light from nowhere. Among their tangled roots glowed a faint spark, like a flame refusing to die. None knew what it was, but some believed it to be the earth's own memory, guarding the first spark so it would not fade even as time folded upon itself. Humans gradually stopped speaking of the past. They no longer told tales of the light that had descended from the mountain, for that story now lived within their blood and breath. Children were born unafraid of darkness, and the old died with smiles, as if knowing death was not an end, but another form of return. The world grew quieter, yet fuller. In every silence, something spoke not in words, not in sound, but through awareness gazing back. The sky, no longer bound to direction, softened like untouched water. Beyond the blurred horizon, something glowed that resembled dawn, though it was not the sun. It was the remnant of the first light, no longer wishing to be worshipped, only to be remembered. And humankind, in their stillness, understood. They did not bow, nor lift their gaze. They simply stood, breathing softly, merging with a world now dreaming of itself. The final night arrived without warning, like a blanket slowly descending upon a weary world. There were no stars, no moon, only a faint glow rising from the earth, soft and calming like a child's breath. Everything seemed still. Yet within that stillness, something continued to move. Not time, not wind, but memory itself. The mountain, the lake, the forest, and humankind had become one consciousness slowly closing its eyes. They no longer thought of beginnings or endings, for both had merged into the same circle, one that turned not to reach anything, but simply to remain. The world rested now, not in darkness, but in the light that had become part of its own being. In the valley that once blazed with light, the soil was soft as living skin. Every step left a glowing trace that faded away, as though the earth were remembering each touch before falling fully asleep. On the grass, dew shimmered like fragments of dreams never fully spoken. The air was so still that one could hear their own heartbeat as song. Those who remained awake sat close together, speaking no words, only watching the mist descend from the mountains. Within that mist, shapes sometimes appeared, perhaps only tricks of light, or perhaps the remnants of those who had come with the first dawn. Children slept in their mother's arms, their breaths calm, their faces faintly reflecting something older than stars. They dreamed of singing water, of light walking across stone, of a gentle voice that spoke without words. The elders watched them and smiled, knowing the world had found a new way to remember itself. The light that had once descended from the sky now lived within their sleeping eyes, a quiet pulse that would pass from one generation to the next, long after the story of the first light had been forgotten. The mountain slowly lost its shape behind the mist, becoming a soft silhouette merging with the sky. There was no longer a boundary between sky and earth, between water and air. All had become one tender hue beyond description, a color that could not be named. Within that haze, a small light still pulsed, like a star refusing to die even after the heavens had closed. It was not large, not bright, only enough to mark that something still existed, something that would never fully fade. The old woman who once spoke to the earth now lay beside the lake. Her eyes were closed, but a faint smile lingered, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. The light around her body trembled softly, then dissolved into the air like fine dust returning home. There was no ceremony, no tears, for all knew she had not gone anywhere. She had simply become part of the living silence, now covering the world, a silence that breathed, that remembered. The final wind passed, carrying the scent of metal, wet soil, and wildflowers. It swept through the valley, touching stones, leaves, and human skin, as though bidding a gentle farewell before the long sleep began. The lights from the lake, the mountain, and the air, dimmed not extinguished, merely resting. The world now held itself in its own embrace, and within that embrace it found a peace untouched for millennia. There were no gods anymore, no worship, for there was nothing left to revere. Only beauty itself, pure and simple, like the first light ever to exist, adored not for its power, but for being the reason all things wished to remain. And when the earth finally slept, it dreamed of itself, of the day it first learned to shine. In that dream, there were no humans, no time, only an endless breath flowing softly and eternal. Through the mist that blanketed the valley, the world faded gently, not because it ended, but because it had become one with the light that had birthed it. So the story closed, like night folding over day, without truly extinguishing the glow. Only silence remained, a beautiful silence where all things became one again, and the world slept in the arms of its first light.